Changes. Hold on.
Hello.
Wow,
Good evening.
hello. Hi, Kenny. How is everybody? Mhm, Good. Yeah,
Like the meeting to order, please. Well, we just go around the room, just introduce ourselves. I'm Michael Clausen, Vice Chair.
I'm Angie Morano, one of the members.
I'm Corinne Julo, Town Clerk.
Pat Cox Sainsbury, guest.
Lisa Keyworth, Treasurer.
Jim Richards, member.
Mr. Bassett,
You want to introduce yourself?
I'm Kenny Bassett. I'm just a visitor.
thank you. All right, are there any adjustments to the agenda, including additions or deletions?
I don't have any. I wanted to have a discussion about somebody from NRPC perhaps coming to visit or helping us review the capital plan, but I think it could probably fall under the bullet for review of the program. If you
Under
all
number
are-
5,
Yeah, if you all are comfortable with that.
so, the planning, Northeast Regional
Yeah.
Planning. Okay,
And I was curious if there's any feedback from the select board or voters on the capital plan. But I guess that could also come under review.
I think so.
Well, this might not, I don't even know if we have time for it tonight, but. And it's something a little bit new. If we've talked about in the past, there's a change. We have a capital plan going forward for this year. But if there is a change or an adjustment to that capital plan, how do we go about doing it, staying within the guidelines of the dollars spent? And I can talk about a library example that just recently came up, like the substitute, but I don't know.
I think we can talk about that in number 5, because I have on my list to review is how we, like, one of the sections in here is monitoring,
Good. Okay.
and I wanted to discuss.
Perfect, thank you.
all right. Anything else?
Number 5 is going to be very robust.
Yeah, so
Let's get to it.
number 3, public comment. Are there any comments from the public? For items not on the agenda?
Pat, Kenny? You have anything you want to make a comment on before we start?
All right, thank you. Committee membership. I know I wasn't here at the last meeting, but I understand,
You came this close. to being voted in as president.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
I actually called chair.
Oh, sure.
Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Kevin gets a better car, actually. So.
Sure, make me president.
We'll touch that. With the former chair's, resignation, I know I happened to stop into the town offices to, pick up an absentee ballot for town meeting day, and I just chatted briefly with Corinne about, sort of process going forward. If I-
I'm very sorry.
Sorry. And, so we need to talk about reorganization, and then also in terms of the process for soliciting new members for the committee, correct?
Correct.
Well, based on the meeting, the last meeting, I went ahead and put out an advertisement. I just didn't get it out in time to have letters for this meeting. So they'll be for the next meeting where we review them And then, hopefully put one forward to the select board.
Oh, good, so there's interest.
So in May, I don't have any letters yet. I've had a couple.
Yes, we do.
people on.
That's
Oh, we do?
terrific.
Oh, great.
Terrific.
Okay,
We have Pat has submitted a letter.
Terrific.
All right,
very nice.
so that will be an agenda
I didn't
item,
want to put you on the
for
spot.
next,
I didn't see it, so.
agenda. Let me just put, pick the numbers. And so there's really only two protocol officers, correct, the chair and vice chair,
So the question really is, do we reorganize now
or wait. until-
following annual appointments or wait until we have a new
Yeah.
member?
My sense, I'm curious to hear everyone else's reaction, is we wait until we have a full slate of membership before we have the discussion or vote on chair and vice chair positions.
And you're willing to stay in the role through that time?
Correct.
Yeah,
Fine.
that works.
All right, so that's what we'll do. Now, the other item there was review liaison assignments. Do we want to do that now, or do you want to do us also wait until we have a full slate of membership? Or is there something that needs to go out in the intervening time, which would necessitate having that conversation now?
Well, we're gonna send out the outreach material before the next meeting.
But did we put in that letter, who, like liaisons? Okay,
So we'll just continue as is until we change it.
Yeah, I don't know that the
Yeah,
boards
right.
know who their liaison is. We'd know. You know, we have a list,
That's when I annoy them. No.
so.
did we refresh my memory? Last year, did we inform the boards who their liaisons were?
I don't think so,
I reached out to mine.
I didn't,
unless you personally reached
Yeah.
out, yeah,
I wasn't sure if we did as a committee.
I don't
no,
think we did it individually.
I think we did it
Okay.
individually.
All right, so folks, fine, just waiting to table that until we have,
Yes, we don't need to be that formal. Yeah.
okay, all right. Number 5,
Okay.
review program terminology
Deep breath.
updates, confirm program years. We talked a little bit about, Corinne, you want to talk about, Northeast Regional Planning Commission. Then you mentioned the select board and or voter response reaction. And then, Andrew, you want to talk about monitoring and, changes to the existing, items in the plan, yeah. So why don't we start with, just generally speaking, without touching those 3 things we talked about specifically, but are there other areas from the program, that we want to talk about? And when we say confirm program years, is that just putting out there what the next 5-year period is? Is that the idea?
5 or 6. There is some recommendation that we do 6 years, 1 year, the upcoming capital plan,
And then 5 years?
and then 5 years out. Yeah, so it's actually like a 6-year plan,
So it'd be the 2026 would be the next year, correct?
right,
And then
Yep.
it'd be 27, 28, 29, 30, 31,
to 31. If everybody agrees with that.
or people's thoughts.
It's fine with me.
Yeah.
We'll think about it every time anyway.
Do you have the other thought on that?
I don't have a problem with that. I think it's gonna be hard for people to think 6 years out. But if you don't try it, you won't know.
Point.
What, Lisa, or Corinne, would you have a recommendation or thoughts?
I mean, I like it. We discovered this recommendation in a document that was given to us by Northwest Regional Planning for developing a capital plan that we didn't have when we were developing this. Terry was using different resources. We reached out to them with a different question. They sent us that document. And so it's from a entity that's local, deals primarily with Vermont organizations trying to do this, and their thought process was the first year is really your capital budget, like your plan mirrors your budget. And then your 5 years is following that, and then it gives you a better mechanism for planning. If you've got 1 year of a budget and then 5 years of upcoming projects. And after having been through it a year, that it just resonated with both of us. And as far as length, 5 years is really, I spent a lot of time today reviewing the documents that Terry and I used to develop this. And the recommendations, there's no required time span. And they seem to run from 5 years to 25 years. And I've seen examples. The first time I was exposed to a plan was a town way down south. They were doing a 50-year plan.
That's kind of-
And we actually have a 50-year plan for the
For the
Capitol Hall.
community hall, yeah.
Because if you want to start planning for replacing a roof that, or building a building that's going to be $1 million, you want as much time to reserve for it as possible. And that's probably, I would agree with you, is way too much for the voters.
Yeah, I think.
Exactly.
for the voters,
So,
for some of the communities.
That's why it's a spreadsheet in the computer, but
But you're right, there's gonna be things like, okay, we just did a new roof. Roofs last 20 years, put that in 20 years from now.
yeah.
And
That's what we're trying to develop with this maintenance schedule going forward, just
Hmm.
give people in the thinking about, yeah, how do you maintain?
Yeah, that appendix C.
my only concern is that we don't frustrate users. Like, I think I can think that far out.
Yeah,
So as long as we just soft pedal it, we might learn all kinds of stuff where people really show an understanding for their departments.
This year was kind of interesting because we're sort of in the midst, we're trying to think through, we're in the midst of the budgeting process, but we already had capital projects that have approved, and it was just a year to start. And so I don't know that it'll be that much different, because now we have a year behind our belt. We already know what's on tap for this current fiscal year.
Mm.
We'll start in a
July.
few months, yeah.
I really appreciate that comment though, Jim, because I was going through this and I have all kinds of things. I don't, so I'm coming from a different angle
Yeah.
and that hadn't even occurred to me. We've just spent a year and a half, almost maybe 2 years trying to convince voters that this is palatable and we don't want to make too many changes too quickly.
No,
But I think adding one more year on is not a.
Yeah.
It's not like we've changed all the forms or. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe that 50-year plan is just
yeah, I know.
for
I
us
would-
to
I
keep
would-
track of,
that's-
you know, it's
Yeah.
just,
Sure.
you know,
that's
you know,
your
we
job.
replaced a roof in 2025 and we're gonna replace it 30 years out and just throw it out there.
It's not like you're Burlington looking at, oh, when am I gonna
Exactly.
replace my roads, my sewers? my-"
Exactly. My
Yeah.
police cars, my, you know, all that stuff,
Keep it as simple
fire
as-
trucks and everything. Yeah,
Okay.
it's.
To give people some history so that we don't have to go back and think about when we last did something.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And 25 years from now, this group, whoever that will be, is gonna appreciate all this hard work that we put in and kept track of.
You guys will probably still be here, but I'm pretty much.
I will be here.
I know it stayed, I can't remember the number of years, but it may be 20 years. But to your point, Jim, just in terms of all the different capital construction projects the state has to undertake. And for many of which they have to go through bonding associated with, so they have to keep in mind what, they can typically bond for in a given year. And that changes every year based on different recommendations and market fluctuations and all these different things. But the town for this size, I think it's totally appropriate to do the 1+5.
Sounds good.
Do we need to vote on that or?
No, well, I mean, I think Lisa and I both have a whole. Maybe we should start a list now that we're thinking about maybe not wanting to make too many changes.
Okay,
And then, and I,
And prioritize the ones we wanna do.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
And maybe again, do it in consultation with the select, board. I don't know if the select board shares.
well, the select board's gonna be most receptive to a completed document with us saying, we recommend this.
Okay.
Um,
Again, my scare from the beginning on this is that we don't do anything that people throw their hands up and say, this whole idea is stupid, and that's why I'm curious on the feedback. As to whether we did get any frustration or everybody sort of understood it and felt pretty good about it.
so I've written down 5 years to 6 years unanimous, yes. So if we just keep the list and then at the end, we can decide which ones. If there's too many, then maybe we do them all. We can.
we don't necessarily make the decisions today.
No, if we dive into this and this is taking forever, we may want to just like delegate 1 or 2 people to work with Lisa and I and come up with something clean and.
Because the packet, the version that's in your packet, Terry had left a lot of comments.
Yes, yeah, and there's some good ones.
So, and there were some good ones, so that's why I
Just clean it up.
included that.
Okay.
And there were some things that. Yeah,
You may want a subcommittee to take a look at this instead of, I think we'll easily spend the whole meeting. talking about this.
Probably.
Just a thought.
And you wanted to get into about Northwest, they're willing to look at it.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
Hmm.
So why don't we move into that?
Okay,
Because that's tied into this before we start making changes, because they may come back with a whole different recommendation.
Mhm.
yeah, Lisa and I were talking about this and, uh, and lessons learned, and I was thinking, you know, I wish we'd brought in an RPC sooner. You were kind of like, well, why don't we bring them in now? And I was like, that's a great idea. So I reached out and I got an instant reply from Greta Brunswick. She's their senior planner. And she is excited at the possibility of reviewing what documentation we have and talking to us about making it better. So she is willing to come to a meeting. She's willing to work with a group. She said her suggestion for the way to get started was to meet with the chair by Zoom to just come up to speed on where we're at. I was kind of like, well, we don't have a chair right now, not technically. So I told her we would talk about it tonight and get back to her how we want to proceed. If, or even if you guys are on board with that, bringing her in.
I think it goes back to the comment from Jim, and it's helpful, but not disruptive. And not in a
Right.
bad way disruptive, but just, we have a
Hmm.
plan. We've gone through it. We don't, and whatever feedback we have, we should incorporate, obviously, but I
never
don't
thought of
want to
that.
stir the whole.
But I think if she's a resource, we should use it.
here.
And then we can choose what we want.
What I'm hoping is she's somebody who will have very specific experience with towns going through this. So when we say, well, how do other towns monitor changes?
Mhm.
She'll,
She'll know.
yeah, whereas we're kind of like, well, maybe we could try this, maybe we could try that. I don't
Well, that
really,
makes sense.
you know,
Just-
Has she read the plan?
not yet.
Maybe that's where, instead of meeting with the chair, read the plan.
Yeah, I would suggest having her communicate that we're interested, if she could do some review prior to the meeting, and I would actually encourage her to come to a meeting and have a meeting.
And
Yeah,
if she has an insight to provide.
right, and so that we all can hear it.
We can all hear, we can all ask our questions.
That's a good idea. Forces the validity of the program.
So how do we, so to take advantage of her time, because I'm sure she won't come indefinitely. How are we gonna have these listed questions ready? So this circles back around to, do we want to do a line by line review in a meeting? Do we want to have a group meet offline? Either with her and then come back, and I'm sure she'd probably come back too, or the group meet offline and really review what changes we might be interested in.
I still think the first step would be for her to review,
Yeah, I was confused.
Here's comments, let's hear them.
yeah, and then we'll take her comments as well as any other comments. As we
'Cause we
work to
review-
finalize or make any edits or changes.
So I guess where I'm getting stuck, if somebody called me up out of the blue and said, hey, we're considering changes, would you help us? And then they just send me the document and say, what are your comments? I'm gonna read it, and this looks like a great document. You know, so what are we struggling with?
Well, I wonder whether
Like,
it's. Ask her to read the document. Provide feedback on anything obvious that jumps out at her. Based on what she says, we may then come back, or probably will come back with some specifics. That, with specific questions on, well, how do other people handle this, or how other people handle that? So it's kind of a stepwise thing.
Okay, and do we want to review her comments before we invite her to a meeting? Because we're looking at like months out if we wait for each meeting.
I think it depends upon how fast she can turn around a review and provide any comments.
I don't have enough experience with her to know how quickly
But she reached out to you, correct?
I reached out to
Oh,
her.
you reached out to her,
Mhm.
okay, I'm sorry. I missed
See how
that.
quickly she turns it.
Because we can still keep going with the rest of it, the Cs, the
Yes,
appendix
that's right.
Cs and Ds and getting the information out and collecting the information based on our
She's
plan
confident.
that's
So
in
it's not
place.
holding anything
So
up.
it's not holding anything up. So if she doesn't come back for 2 months, we can still
Right,
move forward with our plan and maybe we don't incorporate it till next year. You know, the select board
If
said
there's anything-
they didn't want a lot of changes either, you know,
and,
the first year.
sorry, could I? Did she, or what did you say about her experience with these? You don't know if she has experience with these capital plans?
No, I mean, so I was ruminating, thinking, I wish we'd brought in our regional development at the beginning of this
Yeah.
process, because planning, this is actually supposed to be a planning document.
Right.
Like the statutes, you know, when it's even written in, they have to review it if they don't create it. And so they're planners, they're professional planners. And so, we reached out to her when we had a question about the hearing process based on statute last year. And she was very helpful. She sent us the handbook
Yep.
and a detailed email with this is what I'd recommend. It feels like she has direct experience. I mean, if anything, she knows the statutes and anyway, but I'm not entirely sure, but thinking, and so maybe we don't even want to open this can of worms. That's what we're discussing tonight. Because I didn't have anything specific for her other than, hey, we're reviewing this after 1 year. Would you help us update?
I think it'd be appropriate to respond to her that, you know, you had a conversation with this committee, and it was determined that we were interested in hearing her feedback, and we were asked that she review the plan and provide any comments,
Very,
and then we'll go from there.
And that we may come back with specific questions.
Yep.
And I think our fallback is if she starts to do this massive 180 to say, whoa, you know,
Right.
does this work, yes or no? Because the select board said, don't make major changes. So we're just looking at baby steps. But I think it's a good document. I don't think it's gonna be huge.
The more we can align with the regional planning.
Yeah, it makes
group,
sense.
I think
Right.
is good. It's a good thing, not a bad thing.
I
Right.
can't imagine she
Don't
can
want to
do
be
too much.
a very big outlier in the rest of the state.
And one of my goals, and this, you know, it doesn't have to be the group goal, and you can tell me that, but has been, if we're gonna do this process, we might as well do it so that it meets statutory requirements, and then if we ever decide to do impact fees or last night, the planning commission was talking about a local options tax, so I was
Right.
researching that a little bit today, you know, all those things would be enabled through having a plan that,
Mhm.
so we might as well do it. You
In
don't,
that direction.
you don't have to do it the right way. It can just be a planning tool for budgeting, but it might, from my perspective, it might as well meet statute, and she would be the one to really help with,
One step at a time.
yeah,
Okay, so clear on that?
so, yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Let's talk about, just to go back to Jim's question about any feedback from the select board or voter reaction to the plan, anything you've heard or anyone's commented on?
So, my fault. I didn't do a great job at the town meeting. Presenting it.
So they
At
also
the-
don't want to stir things up, so that may have been okay. Seriously.
Well, I think we were expecting Terry to be there, you know, and Terry's always been the one to, you know, and he wasn't, so, and looking back, I think the slides were a little confusing to some people, because some people had some questions. So,
But they were reasonable, good questions.
they were
Just like-
reasonable. Oh, yeah, they
just-
were great, but there was no negative. There was no negative about it, and people were glad. I got the feeling that people were glad that we
Yeah,
did it.
The feedback only personally I've had, not speaking as one on this committee, but to me has been, we actually know what's going on. We actually, you know, either you know what's going on or you don't. It depends, sometimes it used to depend on sort of where you were in the town or who you had contact with. And it's just so, it's refreshing to people that talk to me about it and said, we know now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though you still kind of know, now you really know.
That's
Right.
awesome.
You can see, it, yeah,
That is
so that
great.
was the whole point,
Yeah,
right? That was the whole
definitely.
point. So I think it was nothing but positive.
That's what I heard.
I
And the
was-
select board, I thought
yeah.
was
Mhm.
thrilled with it, and
I was
But-
surprised at how specific some of the questions were, like
Yeah.
water,
Yeah.
and, you know, people know about this water project
Yeah,
and
the
they're
question about the
really,
grant was a good.
yeah,
yeah,
and.
Yep.
We didn't really know the answer off
Yeah.
the top of our head, so.
so.
I think anybody that.
Since I don't get to
better
vote, I
prepared.
can look at the particulars. Is there a separate vote just on the capital plan? I thought there was.
That was Terry's vision, but it turns out there isn't really any practical way to do that. The way
disconnect it
this,
from the budget.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
it avoids a potential risk, so that's okay.
yeah,
Cool.
and it
Okay.
avoids having one budget voted up and one budget voted down, and
Yeah.
then what do you
Right.
do? So,
And when talking to other towns, I think most,
I don't
everybody
think
we
we found
talked to,
any.
I don't think we found anybody that had a separate one. It was all incorporated into the operating budget for all the towns, all the big
Together,
towns we
yeah.
talked to. So,
and that's the handbook I was reading through from NRPC today contemplated. Yeah, almost all of them across, all of the stuff I was reading through contemplated the select board approving it. And then they would all phrase it in different ways so that it would get voter approval after the select board approves it, but it became, I think, as we're starting this in a newbie form, we were seeing voter approval different than how these documents are presenting it, whereas voter approval means it's, the voters are authorizing the funds through the operating budget that are gonna get allocated to this.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about monitoring. Or.
Oh, can I make a comment about the select board?
Yeah.
Because at the last select board meeting, we didn't specifically bring up the capital plan, but we brought up policies that were developed to enable the creation of the capital plan. And so they reviewed the contingency fund policy and the capital reserve fund policy, and they rescinded them both. Which we,
What? Okay.
yeah, well, the capital fund, no, the capital reserve fund policy. We never created a capital fund. So
Right,
there's a
so that's-
policy on the books with nothing
No
to
fund.
policy.
Okay.
So it made complete sense to
Take away.
take that one away. And the contingency fund, I said, well, we created a contingency reserve fund. But the fund parameters don't match, that was voted on as a ballot line item, don't match what's in your policy. So we should either, we should review the policy. And they took the approach of, well, we don't want to, they're starting to learn and really get their feet under themselves when it comes to this capital plan. And they're like, we don't want to inadvertently create a situation where we have to raise tax dollars to meet certain thresholds in a policy.
Got it.
And they're like, we want to wait and go through another budgeting cycle and see how this continues to all tie together before we contemplate that. So they just said, what's on the books doesn't match what was voted. They're like, let's just rescind it. So,
Makes sense.
and now the fund will be administered according to what the ballot line item is, what the voters authorized, basically.
Which is pretty big. As far as how, it's
But-
for, I think it specifically said for emergencies or unanticipated expenses.
Yeah, cost increases over a year too.
And that's intentional though, like that wording came from the policy, it's a balancing act of. You don't want to tie the select board in, like if this is truly a savings account, you don't want to say. You can only use it for such and such, because you can't anticipate what's gonna happen in
No,
life,
it's impossible.
But previously we only had surplus, which had no parameters at all. We could have built a Ferris wheel. Like, so it's a balancing act, so to speak, of, but
Step in the right
there's a
direction,
little
for
bit
sure.
of, that's my thought. I'm not on the
It is.
select board, so. But those are the discussions that Terry and I were having as we were moving some of these policies for the select board, for the creation of this. But then there's two policies in this. On page 6, well, I guess on page 5, you have the capital improvement budget policy. And that leads right into the capital improvement debt policy. And the select board said that they would defer to our recommendations for what, if there were any changes necessary to this policy after our first go around. But they were clear, they really liked them being incorporated in the plan. Like the contingent, the other two policies were kind of standalones and that kind of confused them. So basically their request was moving forward. We really like everything being in this one document.
I have some things that are highlighted, obviously, and you do too. So those,
Yes, those
yes.
were from Terry, correctly? So
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
There
highlighted
are
ends
some-
of
there are
two.
some things here that are right, like the contingency fund is mentioned here.
Yeah,
So
and
that-
now that's gone.
we need to, yeah,
So-
just.
Well, the fund isn't,
The fund isn't, but the wording is.
yeah.
Okay,
We need to review.
So that was a long-winded way to get to the select board feedback of trying to keep everything.
thank you, I appreciate that. Okay.
So,
Monitoring, I'm wondering if perhaps monitoring. We can have a different word. I think it's like program updates or something, but is the idea, Angie, that whenever something that somebody's already submitted, when they know of a change to that, whatever that might be. That we need to know about it, correct?
Yeah, I think that's one thing, and a longer term project that may extend over several years, you want to know when they're right, when there's something that's changed, is there a price increase, is there a change order
The
that's,
timelines change.
yeah, the timeline's changed. And those are usually done, at least in my, and this is a different field, right, but you typically do them on a, an as needed basis, or at least annually, if nothing has changed.
Didn't we discuss this last
Yes,
meeting?
we
We did,
like we-
yeah.
Yeah,
If you
And-
look at,
and again, we didn't want to put people on the spot, but we did want to say, if there's a change, report it on this form. Oh, it's when we sent out that form to say,
Hey,
and while
changes.
you're at it,
it's.
if
that-
anything that's already approved, then just update it.
Right, and that's part of the outreach. Instead of doing the like three different documents to the different
Right.
boards and commissions, I put it all into one.
Yep.
That, you know, just look at your inventory, anything changed. Any new projects, submit form, appendix D, and then these are your previous submissions, any changes, updates.
Yeah. I mean,
To let
because
us know.
It'll be the first time through this, we'll just have to.
There
Yeah.
were any on timing amounts or,
Right, there were three things, yeah, there
Yeah.
were, yeah.
The question I have, is that, is this something we only want to do on an annual basis? Or if we also want to provide instruction that if they're aware of something that's changed outside of the annual reporting period, do we want them to notify us that as soon as they know it, or is that the idea?
but didn't we discuss this, that is this our responsibility or the select boards? Because once the budget is approved, who's responsible for monitoring expenditures? I would think it's the select board, not us. We need to know about it because we're planning, but I would think it's the select board who should be responsible for monitoring actual,
They have to decide to allocate, if there's a fund, a dollar change, they have to decide
Yeah.
how to manage that.
because they're the ones that are gonna have to deal with it. Is the money there,
Right,
is
if,
the money not
right,
there?
if it's over budget or they're gonna, if there's a change, they're gonna have to go to the select board
So
and
we'll
get
ask the
approval for
question,
that.
If they go to the select board, do they still like copy us on it, or how do we become aware, other than outside of the annual updating process?
So on page 9, this is
Yep.
actually step 10, and there are
Have us, Terry.
some specifics in there, but I actually, after our conversation last week, I was thinking we could probably nix the whole thing. And then today I went to the Vermont Government Finance Officers Association's page. They have policy recommendations for developing capital budgets. And one of their recommendations is that you have a process for monitoring projects. And I think this is hard for us to understand because we haven't gone through a full cycle yet. I think this is going to be our next big hurdle. Because another thing they talked a lot about was how you develop, which I don't think we've really done yet because our projects haven't really needed money. They've all come to us saying they're fully funded. But financial capacity, a large part of this process is supposed to be determining financial capacity of the town, and that's step 4. So we're supposed to have done like a debt analysis, so we know, like you were referring to earlier, what is our bonding capacity? Like right now, fire department is wanting to potentially maybe go for a $3 million bond, and I keep telling them, do you know if we have that debt capacity? And they look at me blankly. And so this was supposed to be one of the functions of this committee, and I hadn't really connected that. But if we're doing this kind of financial analysis, how do we keep that up and keep recommendations to the select board going if we don't know how projects are moving along? So this is the quandary of how do we monitor so we know financially how things are going, but yet not end up responsible for the process or progress of a project.
I was just thinking about, getting back up. I suppose, because the decision makers are usually the last to, I mean, I would think we would need, in my opinion, we would need to or help organize that for the select board in some way. Like what's on, here's what we recommend. Here's a change that's happening. It's up to you, the select board, to determine whether or not you funded that change, and it appears like it's up to us to determine how potentially to
And that's,
offer opportunities to fund it, should it be significant.
yeah, the Vermont GFOA, it was, like 2 sentences in a list of make sure your plan has this. But it was pretty clear, like, have a really clear process,
Yeah,
like
I think you have to come up with
outline,
something.
like, and then I was thinking it doesn't have to be difficult. It could be the liaisons will check in with their committee quarterly and there will be a form. But it should probably be in here.
Yeah, I'm reading the step 4, right?
Yeah.
Guess it's
So what you were gonna say something?
MS dots.
Just whether I'm seeing, it. So what I was gonna ask was, well, if the only time we really need to know what's going on is if we're going through something big like a bond limit or whatever. Then that's the time when I would feel comfortable going back to everybody saying, okay, we
Mhm.
need to do this, and therefore we need to ask
Yeah.
you to provide us with this additional information and do it on an exception basis. But that's
So-
on one hand. On the other hand,
Yeah.
you're saying there's stuff we need to do anyways, but I think that's stuff that we do, like what is our bond limiting? That doesn't necessarily involve any of these other groups. That's something that, like the cemetery committee or the library committee, that's our responsibility. So if we can go about doing what we need to be doing, but then there's a trigger like, okay, we now really need to not nail down the numbers because we want to go for a $3 million bond. So then, again, I'm repeating myself, then we can go back to everybody on an exception basis and saying, we need to ask you to do this. And here's the reason.
I really like that, but that's what should be in here then. Like,
Okay.
you know, we will be asking all the committees where they're at financially when we have to determine A, B, and C. We could do a threshold amount, like the 10 grand
Or-
or,
In the event we need to determine A, B, or C, we will then come back.
yeah,
It's
and
like-
there probably should be like a form. So, because that's what we're doing for everything else. You know, I'm always thinking of consistency. We're sending them all these forms for, you know, appendix A, and maybe we don't want an appendix.
Well, and I think we need to be really clear
But
just to all these entities who are, I mean, if there's an overage for any amount other than let's pick one. $10,000 for the carpet for the library. That was a quote from last year. Lowe's raised their prices and it's $10,350. What steps does the library take? What do we tell them? To get those additional dollars? They're gonna go directly with the select board and say, you know, it's $350 over, we can cover it, but we need your approval.
Hmm.
Is that it? Or are we looking for, again, back to the consistency? Do you want everything to come through here and then to the select board, at least be notified?
I mean, consistency is the ideal, and then you have all these projects.
Regardless of the amount, maybe put a threshold on the amount.
I don't think we add value. We just add it to that.
Yeah.
But
And
it's
it's, you
big,
know, they come to us, we go, oh, okay, we go to the select board, the select board says yes or no, they may as well just go straight to the select board.
but if they don't have the funds, or if they're, you're right.
To your example, we need an extra $350.
Yeah.
Yes or no? So we add no value to that.
Yeah.
If they come back saying, oh, it doubled and now we need an extra 10,000, well, then maybe that starts to.
So I just read all this afternoon. I'm really curious what.
Well, I'm thinking, what if they're in the middle of the carpeting and I don't know, something happens and that they add $3,000, they gotta wait till the next meeting to come back to us? And then they've gotta go to
No, I think
for a
that's
select
great.
board
That's
meeting, that it's not gonna happen.
Great, that's good.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen. So
I think it's pretty.
in a
simple,
perfect
but I-
world,
Yeah.
you know, we're not gonna call an emergency meeting to approve and then have the select board call an emergency meeting
No,
to
we
approve.
just- I think our task is to keep track of just.
I think it's just to keep track of, I don't, you know, they can't come through us for approval.
No.
Well, and with you on the committee, that's pretty easy. You see with all the expenses as the treasurer and, so maybe
What about you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
chief, he's president.
Chief president and chair.
What's the word they're coming after? So, I have a sense that on many of these things, we can get down into the weeds,
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm down there.
which is not a bad thing. But I'm just mindful of the task at hand and of the agenda as well as, everything else we want to try and cover tonight. So I'm wondering if maybe we should, is it worth stopping right now and just asking, or having a quick discussion about the need to have a subcommittee? That would
Happens.
sort of work with, Lisa and Corinne to come up with sort of those areas for which we have changes or comments or edits. As opposed to everybody going, sitting down, we have probably to schedule a meeting
Just to do
for a
that.
couple of hours just to do that as a committee. If you're gonna do like a line by line or section by section. Review, which I'm not opposed to either, but I just guess want to hear what people's thoughts are.
Yeah, I think. I guess my thought, you know, some of this probably should happen with the big committee, like monitoring, if we're gonna put in here the steps for monitoring. Maybe we should all be on, I don't know, maybe it'd be better to have a subcommittee come up with a recommendation.
And then bring it back.
But like assessing the town's financial capacity, I had notes like. You know, we should probably have in here how we're gonna handle inflation and, you know, we should probably talk about. How capital reserves are accumulated, because that was very confusing for people, and I think we finally get it now. And, you know, rather than the one big pot, each department is gonna have. So why not put that in here?
And I guess at some point, I need some additional clarification about what exactly this committee's. role is with
I was
respect to
wondering the
sta-
same thing, because this is,
And probably your role. as
is
well-
getting
as well as
really,
the tre-
yeah.
The town clerk and the accountant's role with respect to this analysis or all this data associated with step 4, because I guess I mostly, you know.
I
over-
never-
Over this, but I'm looking at where it says this analysis helps the capital improvement committee to propose a funding source schedule designed to keep the tax rate stable, balance debt service and operating expenditures, determine available debt capacity and acceptable debt service levels, maximize intergovernmental aid for capital expenditures. I'm kind of like, what?
Well, and this is for, when you have so many projects going on that this is too much for the select board, they've outsourced it. That's how I view this, like,
What do you mean they outsourced it?
they've delegated it,
Two.
so us. So they want our recommendations, so,
It that requires a fairly extensive analysis, that takes into consideration all of these things that are listed here. Which I'm assuming, I don't know if does the town have? Does the accountant focus on these things
We have an auditor.
or an auditor?
We have an auditor. He's a CPA that, and he audits the books every year. And we can use him as, to call and ask questions and, but I think in order for him to do a debt analysis and all of that, that's gonna be an additional
Exactly.
funds. That's not part of his contract for an audit.
I mean, I guess. To me, I read this and this is written to work for any town. In Vermont, so you could be Burlington, you could be North Hero, and this is our opportunity to tweak it so that it works for us. So it probably would be good to know. Okay, we as a town don't want to ever be in debt more than 30% of our annual operating budget. Just have that in there. That's a pretty easy metric to review. But you're right, this is really broad. But how are we, if we do get to the point where all these projects are coming in. And the select board is looking and they're not fully funded, and we're about to get a big one, the fire. Station, and we're supposed to recommend to the select board whether or not to move forward with it. Based on budgeting. We should know what our debt capacity is. And I don't think that's a difficult. Thing, I hope it's not, maybe I tend to be,
But even coming up with
Crazy.
that percentage, I mean, presumably the select board would have to make that decision.
yeah.
The percentage is the issue. You can make the math work.
So these are the things I'm thinking of. This is our opportunity to put a line in there. We will never, our debt capacity will never be 30% of our annual operating budget, and then have that discussion with the select board. And I'm not sure that's a subcommittee policy.
So I thought that was part of the debt policy.
Is it? Maybe,
It's there are specific numbers in the debt policy section.
10%.
10%, 10%. So that's already in there.
But that's 10% of your operating as opposed to a bond that is more than 30% of your.
yeah, it is in there.
So I think what Corinne is referring to is a one-time bond as a percentage of our operating budget versus debt service
Mhm.
at 10%
Right.
of our operating budget. So it's
Mhm.
two different things. Do we need to, how much do we need to get done this year? This sounds a little bit complicated. Maybe it isn't. Maybe when we talk to the regional planning person or talk to the accountant or talk to Vermont Bonding Agency, they go, oh, here's the formula. And we go, okay, great, and plug in the numbers and 60 minutes later, we've got the answer. To me, if it's easy, great. Let's see what we can get on our own. And if it's not, well, does that have to be in this year's revisions, or can we keep working on that for next year's revisions?
I think that's what we're trying to decide.
Yeah, I think that was part of the Northwest planning document that, don't go big and create the whole
Yeah.
thing at once. Like, take it step by step, where are your needs, where you see a weakness, and start there and build on that. So I think we get the basics. And then-
Take off too quick.
Exactly, and that's kind of,
So what do we want
Too
to
much.
focus on next? Do we want to focus on the Schedule C? Do we want to focus on?
because we can't do
revising
it all
this?
in
Yeah.
1 year,
No,
for sure.
So you take the low hanging fruit, right? You take the things that are maybe a little more structured in the sense of how to say something. There are a couple of good examples in here and basics as opposed to going too deep. You want to kind of clean this up and make it a little better document.
Right.
Learn some things, but talking about these big That's a discussion.
Again, does that come back to feedback from our regional planning person in terms of what they see as our priorities to address in the coming years?
And that we can ask them that. Yeah, what I don't want to have happen is we've created a situation where inadvertently, because this is the first go around, that we fail. Like it says in here that, you know, the town will make, a down payment of 10% of the total project costs from previous revenues. And we've been lucky that the projects we've reviewed so far have come to us completely funded. We start getting projects that aren't, you know, I don't want us to forget about these. And take the opportunity to tweak them now that we know a little better of what we're doing. But I completely agree with baby steps.
I can take a shot at putting something together if we were determined that we were interested in putting together a model that would track that. It's gonna take me a little bit, but,
And you could do it.
Have your students do it.
sorry.
Have your students do it. Good project.
I'm thinking, yeah, what is revolt?
But it's really, it's determining what the limits are and what the numbers are. I mean, you can make anything work and build a model that does it, but you have to have a lot of input that where everybody's agreeing on what goes into it.
Yeah.
But just taking what's in here and that could be put together and use the current financial information, create something that, well, I use one off of that.
Yeah, that's-
If you're willing to do that, we'd all appreciate it.
So I'm hearing what we might want a subcommittee, but the subcommittee should be directed to just do general overview. Perhaps we should stick to processes we've already been through and updating those. And as we move through this financial analysis and this monitoring next step, we can kind of be taking notes.
Yeah, I think so.
But-
I was just sitting here thinking about, flip this for a moment, about number 9, timeline review. I'm wondering if it's worth having a conversation about our timeline in terms of what things we know that need to move. Like, for example, the timing of the public hearing and maybe some of the reports coming back from the committees or departments. If, I'm wondering if we could nail that down, if that would then help us
Focus on what needs to be
What-
updated.
first, and then what, and how much time, quite honestly, how much time we have, and then with that, what can we get done in that amount of time?
Mhm.
Does that make any sense?
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think at a bare minimum, updating the date, the years. And then I think we should start calling this a program rather than a plan and maybe put some definitions for terminology in here, because I think we all struggled with that in communicating with the select board and the public, just. To me, those are kind of the minimums.
And I just had one question. Does this go to the select board every year for approval, or is this just going to be our
Working document,
our procedures?
yeah,
Or is it? Because it's, right now it's set up to be approved by them every year and signed by them every year. So is it just a procedural thing or is it a?
Well, it says effective of this date until amended or repealed, and if the dates on the front are for 6 years, I would read that it lasts that amount of time. I figured we were contemplating an update because we just started this discussion like last October, when we realized
But every year we add a year on. So
that
every,
would be the plan. So this would, that's why I'm suggesting we call this the program,
and it's good for
and it's good for the time
the
length on
time,
here. And we use this to create the plan and budget.
and that's the 6
And
years.
I think we struggle with that so much because that 5-year plan is called a plan and this is called a plan and we kept,
Yeah, this is really.
Thinking.
A program. What do you call
Yeah.
program?
It's so
Procedure.
this one,
Procedures.
it does say program,
the,
and maybe I changed
the
it.
handbook from NRPC called it a program. But they would use the word interchangeably with plan, so I was still a little confused. That's why I think we put definitions in the front, we call it what we want and what would make sense to all of us, and we just try to be consistent. And if procedures or policy makes more sense, then
That's the present.
it's.
Okay, so the one that the select board signed last year, that's what we're going with. Until we
For
make
now,
changes. and
yeah.
Present it to them And have them sign.
There's some,
Okay,
there's some, you know,
now I got it.
Scribner's things.
I got, it. No,
Now, may I, because it's under here, I have a real life example that I want to read some guidance on to think about. The library, I've submitted its 5-year budget, and the first project that was for 24-25 is done. Okay, boy, that's terrific. Thank you so much. That was the basement. Second
Have their
one,
own budget?
yeah. Exactly.
Nice.
The, and 47 cents. The project for this year is a carpet replacement at $10,000. We, through a variety of things that have happened in the last couple of months related to changes in, funding and potential funding sources in the future, have determined that there probably is no opportunity in the near future for us to submit a grant for any expansion in the expansion, meaning a place to have essentially the, book sale. The book sale, is part of our operating budget dollars, even though they're donations. We have a $5,000 number in there every year. It's been there like that forever. It's been working fine here, but we're coming well short of what we used to receive, because it's just not on site. So, long story short, the board had an opportunity through a contact to submit a $10,000 grant for a shed to put on the property. You know about this because it went to the select board and the commission. We don't have an answer on that yet. It won't be until May, but it's a good chance it'll obviously come through. And all the work we put together, we need the shed to be something that is, has lighting and insulation and just, gives us some other opportunities. It's been about a $13,000 project overall, but it isn't budgeted. It isn't part of it could be budgeted, it isn't part of the existing capital plan. But I know the board would like to replace one of the existing items with this, because it's just critical in terms of, it's a revenue source for us and it served the community. Maybe not as much as the new carpet, but as much as the new carpet.
So will you be doing that instead of the carpet? And we'll be using the 10 grand of
That's
your
the plan.
funds?
That's the recommendation right now.
Okay.
Now, we probably haven't, we all need to talk about doing the carpeting. In the new recommendation, maybe we'll have enough funds in our contingency to do that or not. I don't know. We haven't had the discussion, but the discussion currently is we would like to replace one with the other.
How much is the grant potentially?
10,000. That was the maximum. So we'll have to take another 350 or so out of our contingency, out of our capital fund,
But how much was budgeted for the carpeting?
10,000.
If you get the grant, you don't need to use the carpet money, right?
ET is part of it.
Part of it, just part of it, but I don't know how else to.
Oh,
I guess we could ask for the other thing we could do is say we'd like to do both things, and if we have enough money left, that was my recommendation, but we just wanted to do one step at a time. So if we get to 10, we only spent about $300 or $400, right? And it'd be nice to be able to do both, and I'm not the treasurer of the organization, but I think there's funds there.
so is that the type of thing then that would come through as you're aware of it, or?
That's my question,
Or
where do we take it?
Where do we do it?
And you go straight to the select board,
All right,
because again, we can't add anything to that.
right, I'm good, okay,
You know, Saves you time, saves you explanation.
you guys are okay with that?
well, I mean, going forward, how are these things gonna be handled? They have to go to the select board, right?
Yes,
So we've already, in this case, it's gonna be in this year. We don't even have a plan for this year. We started with next year, starting July 1st, so we don't even have a plan, but these things are gonna come up.
yes, and this is just a small, that was a pretty easy example, but.
Well, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, well, gosh darn it, I don't want what we do to make boards feel constrained. And if you can go out and fully fund a project, you shouldn't feel like you can't do it because you're not doing another one. That isn't the intent. I think what we would want is just to know about it, because then we would review it in light of our planning to make sure, does this affect does this cause any long-term operational, or are there any, all the things we're supposed to review when we're reviewing a plan normally?
Sure.
Does it impede any other projects? And this is,
And
in
we
this case.
weren't
it
willing to do
absolutely-
more than one step at a time because it wasn't clear, but we have a meeting next week and I'm sure we'll. Here's my only comment, just to think about. This is an easy one. It's $10,000. We have a $10,000. It's gonna be, it isn't always gonna be 10,000. It could be 300,000 or 450,000. And those are the things you have to think about, how you want that to work. You don't want groups doing that independently without some feedback,
I think
right?
that's gonna be one of the hardest things for this group, because I think most plans contemplate that there will be one bucket, and we are the gatekeepers. So we do this ranking and this modeling and this controlling so that we can say these 3 projects will get funded, and if you need any more money, you do have to come through us. We would monitor the capital reserve fund. But we've set it up so that there are a lot of reserve funds. I counted them all out today.
Oh my God.
And, you know, so that's, anyway, it doesn't matter. There are a lot of them. So that's partly why I was thinking somewhere in here, we need to delineate, like, okay, we as the town, we have these reserve funds, maybe not delineate them here, because we could have new ones that they could change. But, and this is how they'll be used, you know, if each department is gonna have a capital reserve fund, do they have to come to us before they can spend it, or do they just need to notify us that there's been a change in their project, so we can, from a planning perspective, take that into play?
Are we giving up on the notion of evolving to one capital reserve fund?
For now.
Which is fine, as long as it's just for now.
Yeah.
Because then because if you do that, then if we agree that really the long-term goal is one capital reserve fund, then we don't have to get into the weeds on all these other capital reserve funds.
We're in the weeds. I mean, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
But I think
And-
to me, if we believe that the idea is you move towards one capital reserve fund, those exist now. Basically, they get frozen, and what would be going into those individual capital reserve funds, unless it's monies to the library, you know, not a grant, but somebody who made a huge donation specifically to the library in their will,
Hmm,
that goes to the library. But anything else that's coming from the town goes into this general fund, and if the library has a project and they still have $5,000 in their capital reserve fund, well, good, they need 5,000, they're asking the select board for 5,000 less, because they're gonna take that 5,000 and close out their capital reserve.
The problem is we can't override voter authority. And Vermont statute has said that if voters authorize a capital reserve fund, those funds can be held and can only be spent for that purpose.
Right,
So we have a library capital reserve fund that can only be used for library capital reserves.
and I'm not disputing that.
Okay,
What I'm saying is, as time goes on, and we stop funding that library capital reserve fund, and that gets drawn down to 0, we've respected the law. And from there on, there's, the funding comes out of, the one fund.
Except for those special circumstances where someone may give $1 million to the community hall. or something, or the library,
And that's their money, because their PR
whatever,
garnered them that money.
PR machine.
so I like that idea. That was what I envisioned when we started this. That has been the number one objection with everybody since we started it. So for this thing to happen, we had to kind of, okay, the current reserves that are in place will stay in place. And we since even created more reserves. Now that people are on board with this capital planning and kind of, oh, this is a great idea, they all kind of want their own reserve.
Well,
So-
why do they want their own reserve?
Because they want to start capital planning, and that's the model that's in place right
They
now.
have the credit for the money, though. It's
Yeah,
just, it's more logistics of how it's managed rather than
Okay,
the money leaving, and nobody's stealing it. Right?
Right.
It's going into one pot on a ledger. They'll say that out of that money, they have 25% of it, or whatever the number is.
And to me, the big turnaround is to say,
But it gives.
okay, but you've got 20,000 in your capital reserve fund. You need 80,000. What are you gonna do?
right.
Whereas if we have a townwide capital reserve fund with $400,000 in it, you just need to make your pitch for your 80,000 coming out of that 400,000.
That's what we're moving around.
You're long-term, you're better off
I agree.
coming out of the big pool.
Money should be fungible within
I agree,
that fund.
but it's not the process it's not the way it's set up right now, and it's,
Understood, but to evolve there does not violate any of what you talked about in terms of town or state. We just need to sell it. Reassure people, show the benefit.
Well, it's gonna work, and they're gonna still have, be able to do the projects that they need.
And maybe do them
Take
sooner.
time, and maybe more,
And
sooner.
maybe do them sooner.
Just a little bit of experience in getting that, I think that's stepwise
so
approach.
we'll keep it vague on purpose. So,
Okay, I'm good with that. Sure.
Yeah,
But over time, it's a good thing. We just don't want to do everything in one.
Right, right,
People have
yeah.
to, we have to all learn that we can trust this process.
Yeah.
And you're gonna get the projects you so desperately need.
but again, this is, if we really want to do that, that's where it comes back to why we need to do financial analysis and why we need to do monitoring, because we're gatekeeping a huge
Right.
amount of money.
Right.
And so we can't just say, go to the select board. So right now, we have these individual funds and the select board really is in control of them,
They still will be.
so.
They would still be in control of the big fund.
Yeah, they are.
It's not,
It'd be a lot
always in
easier. They'd
control.
only have to manage one fund
Yeah.
instead of 7.
we have no monetary, we have no control over funds at all.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, so we're at 6:29.
No, I want them.
I just want to be cognizant of everyone's time, and our agenda, I suggest we land on a decision of whether or not we want to do a subcommittee, if we want to do a committee of the whole for, going through this process, of this review process. What do people think? Well, maybe I should first ask, are there any volunteers to be part of the subcommittee? That may determine where.
Yeah, I'm not sure we would want a subcommittee. A subcommittee would be a forum and we still have to do agendas and minutes.
Okay.
If we did a working group, it would be 2 people who would work. Well, you could, either one of us, you could work with just the treasurer or both of us, but, you might get farther with working just with Lisa, because I like a rabbit hole.
Good rabbit holes, don't you think?
So,
We
call
should be
it-
analyzing interest rates, guys.
We'll be calling it a working group.
But-
Is there interest in a working group, or would the committee members prefer to do it as a whole? Which would require, I'm assuming, like another, a whole meeting, either another meeting in addition to our regular monthly scheduled meeting, or the next monthly meeting focus completely on that, and we might have to go for a couple of hours.
But don't we still need somebody to sort of, there's lots of comments here with suggestions. To at least go through it and say, here's a recommendation, so that when we do meet as a group, we have something to work with, or are we starting?
That's what Mike was asking. Do we,
No, I'm trying
you
to
know,
just,
do a couple of people to come with recommendations, or do we all tackle it together?
I know, I'm just trying to make sure we got the.
Yeah.
doesn't make-
Let me throw this out there. The documents aren't due back till June 27th, so we actually have April, May, and June. Of
Okay.
really, we were not gonna have any information back from the different departments. So we have time.
How about this? How about if we plan on doing this next committee meeting, we'll pick a time that everyone's comfortable with in terms of how long we'll commit to doing it for that evening. But in addition to that, where we know that there are already comments provided, like Terry's comments or some of the other comments that we discussed this evening, if somebody could just put those in one document or something, so that when we're going through it, maybe, and we can actually review it in advance of that meeting, we can, if we have time, and come to the meeting with some, information under our belts, might be more productive meeting just to move through it. Unless people comfortable, and it may take a couple of meetings, to your point, Lisa, because we do the point, it could be, part of the April and part of the May meeting. Are people comfortable with
I'm happy to take the comments and add them to the document.
that? Okay, thank you.
And
If somebody wants to send me them, if you
Gary's-
got, each want to send me what you have.
And do you want a single document with the comments listed, like maybe like the section A, should we do A, B, and C, section
Yeah.
2, should we do A? You don't want them incorporated in the,
I think you add them, wouldn't use this as a document. You make
That's what
some
I'm
changes on it,
Traction.
yeah,
Yeah.
tracking, yeah.
okay,
Yeah, track the changes.
Is that easier for you?
Try and do whatever.
Okay.
Yes, goes.
that's the skills. Mad skills.
What about how much time are folks going to commit? Like a 2-hour meeting next time, or?
I'm in Europe. So
Oh, you know,
it's like with the time zones, it's after midnight,
So I
so,
get that.
but otherwise I'm happy to spend time on this.
Are you able to spend some time, depending upon, when are you gonna be in Europe?
18th to 28th.
Lisa, do you think you could get something to us by when?
Something, are you gonna send me stuff to add to it?
Yeah, well, yeah, so it would be. people, taking what you have already and any additional comments and then turning around, but I realize we have to give. people
You'd have to get it to me.
Yeah,
I mean, I can turn it around pretty quickly, so.
And we could move our meeting to the 30th instead of the 23rd.
if you don't mind.
Of April,
Yeah. It would be the 5th Wednesday instead of the
Wednesday.
4th, and the meeting room is open.
are you back in town?
Yep. Should be on jet lag by then. If it takes me about a day.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
I'm
I
fine with the 30th. That works.
Thank you, John.
don't want to be a slacker.
No, thank you,
No, I know.
thank you for suggesting. So let's go back to Lisa's comment, just in terms of like how much, like if we give people like a couple of weeks, that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Reasonable, so today is the 26th. If we go to get things to Lisa by the 9th. Any comments you have,
Yeah, I can get them back to you.
or do you need more time in there?
I'm, because I can read emails. I'll have my laptop with me, so I don't have to have it back by the 18th. I can review it while I'm on the road.
9th, okay with you, 9th? In terms of us getting. This isn't your model, by the way.
Right, no, I'm focused on that. And
Okay.
I don't know if I'll have too much to add.
All right, so let's say if the committee members, can get information back to Lisa by April 9th. She can then turn it around at some point prior to the 30th. When the meeting is, and we'll give some time to the chance to review some of that, and so that when we come and meet on the 30th. Are people comfortable meeting for 2 hours? Dedicating that? All right. Kenzie?
Yes.
Okay, so let's plan on a 2-hour meeting where we're gonna focus solely on, or primarily on
The document.
the document. That's all like a plan.
Sounds good.
Now, is there anything that, when is the next communication out to the purpose?
So we wanted it at the last meeting, we talked about getting it out before their April meeting, so that they, or at least the beginning, right, of April? I mean, they're gonna have a May meeting and a June meeting. It's not due back until June 27th. So like library has a meeting next week,
Yeah.
so their
To
agenda,
have it. I mean,
it's ready to go. If you guys read it and there's no changes,
Yeah,
I can send it out.
I'm fine with that.
me too.
Frank, there was one change that Frank wanted on D, right, that I'll make, you had sent me.
Yeah, I think there's a typo on that one. I think phase enhancement was knocked down a line when you added the box of department justifications, but we can talk about that.
Okay,
Um,
and then what about the changes Angie and I made to C? And you had recommended plumbing, although unless we're gonna completely do the entire plumbing in a facility, I don't see it being,
No, I just said, yeah, HVAC is fine.
okay. I already put your shed on there. Did you know that? For the library.
It's great for library, they're
I
tough,
think this is
Struck with
great.
Ben, you got your shed.
they're tough, I know.
That's awesome. So would we'd be sending this out and asking board members to add year acquired and that kind of information?
Yeah, well, I should have that year acquired, we have. And the only one I didn't know was the Omen Station. I have no idea when we got that.
Hmm. I think I have the deed for that.
Because a lot of it was from our inventories, Appendix A, so
Hmm,
we had a lot of that. I don't have the life expectancy, but we have a schedule, so if everybody's good with what Angie and I came up with, we'll
Work in progress.
continue working on filling that out.
Okay.
So,
Okay,
yeah, so if everybody's good with what was in the packet, then I'll get it out tomorrow. I can send it out
yeah.
Great.
I also think we should add appendix D. And,
on the letter.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll get all that out tomorrow.
we want to talk about the timeline. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah.
We want to talk about the timeline now, or do we want to talk about the potential changes?
So the last meeting, we did make the changes to the timeline. There, Terry had made changes
Okay.
and I had made changes backing up so that we could include the planning
Planning
commission. And kind of backed up
Yeah,
to get an earlier, I think, with the select board and the
Okay.
hearing and stuff to account for two if we needed it.
okay,
So we had backed all those dates up.
okay, so that's already done.
Because I think last year we asked for all the information back by August, the end of August, so we've already backed everything up 2 months.
Okay.
To
perfect.
account for the planning commission
Yeah.
and so.
Okay.
Unless there's something else in the timeline that you feel we missed, but we did do that.
No, I think it was the push at the beginning of last year when we just had to get things to the
Yeah,
board to vote
Right,
on.
because
it.
when we first convened in March last year, was it March or April?
yeah, we had the kickoff meeting in
Yeah.
April
April.
to the
Yeah.
town, so
Right.
yeah, there was getting the documents together, so
Right.
we're better prepared this year, so it's gonna go out and get back earlier.
All right,
Right after town meeting.
so I think we're down to future agenda items, if I'm not mistaken.
Elect chairperson.
So, well, so,
President.
so next meeting, we talked about just reviewing the document, but we have the board reorg and we're gonna have the letters of interest.
So we have to have that, again, board reorg, letters of interest.
So 1 hour and a half for the. Forget it. 90 minutes to review. Making it up.
Okay, still a 2 hour meeting, first
Yeah.
half hour will be
Yeah, I
the
just think that.
board,
Sure.
yeah.
Is there anything else for a future agenda item that we're aware of at this point in time for the next
That's right,
meeting?
keep the library under control.
I'll try not to do so much reading on the internet.
We got time. we got years.
Anything else from anyone?
You did a good job, Mr.
I
Chairman.
think, yeah, I think we found a name.
I think we all agree with that.
Okay, so I will entertain a motion for adjournment, please.
May I speak?
Oh,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
ahead.
sir.
First of all, as a citizen, I'm very appreciative of all of your efforts. You've got a tiger by the tail, obviously. And I am aware, or I'm becoming aware, that you're at the ground floor in a lot of ways. And I personally have confidence that everything will work out. I'd like to relate a short story relative to debt service. I served on the DRB at a time when the PC and the DRB were involved in updating the North Hero regulations. And Fire Chief Mike Murdoch came and offered testimony. And you're probably aware that we have height restrictions on buildings because we have certain length of ladders in the fire department. And in that discussion, we talked about multifamily housing and the square footage. And when it got to be about 5,000 feet, Mike said, we can't service that fire because we don't have pumping capability. And that was quite an aha moment for me. And so when Corinne mentioned something about debt service as an educational thing, oh, by the way, we appreciate that you have really put a lot of effort into this new town garage, fire department, whatever. But we have this little thing called debt service, and you may not be able to do it all at once with any amount of money you want. And so I think there's an educational component to what you're doing. And when the gentleman said you just have to sell it, I think part of that is going to be education. And there's a certain reality. Just because we have a very successful town doesn't mean we have a bottomless pit of money. And it's hard not to think that we don't, because we have very vital organizations in town. And they have plans. And I wouldn't want to curtail any of them, because This is all for the benefit of the community. But I do think it's an educational thing that Corinne hit on. The reality is that we have to be able to service the debt that we incur. And that's all I have to say. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Bassett.
Thank you.
And I would echo that just in terms of your comment about education. It's not just educating the citizenry of the community, but with respect to some of these things, as we discussed tonight, it's also educating this committee and helping us make informed decisions or recommendations. So thank you for that. Any other comments or questions from anyone? Okay, so we had a motion and a second, correct?
I think so.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks for participating.
Yes.
Thanks.
Both of
Sorry, I
you.
didn't get, who made the motion?
All right, Angie.
Angie?
Thanks,
Yeah.
Anita.
Angie made it. Jim
Jim
seconded.
second?
Bye, Kenny. I'm turning it off now.
Thank you, left you.
Okay.
Yes, sir.